So this is 50 by 40's first hot topic conversation. Yesterday, we had one already for the different time zone we're operating in Australia, Asia. And today we're having it here which is predominantly the Americas and Europe. So the hot topic is, the idea behind it is to bring up controversial, contentious issues that might be causing some tension points or that present issues that are hard to solve, and we need to kind of crunch them together. This can be issues that are happening within the 50 by 40 network. It can be stuff that's happening outside. The idea is to take some of those stakeholders that we think might be on different sides of the whatever topic we're going to be discussing and try to find ways of collaborating. And we see this, of course, beneficial for 50 by 40, but we also see this as a microcosmos of the wider movement, and hopefully this can help open up discussions outside the 50 by 40 network as well, and/or we can come up with ways of addressing these contentious issues, some of the conundrums we are facing, and find a way forward from that. So the first thing we're going to be discussing today, the first hot topic, is on alternative protein versus voices for food sovereignty. So the idea behind that is that traditionally, or at least over the last maybe 5 to 7, maybe even a decade, there has been a tendency to see the alternative protein sector being affiliated a lot with commodities, a lot with consolidation, and a lot with corporations leading the way and creating big steps and speeding up the process of shifting the food system. Whereas on the other side, we often see the food sovereignty movement being very clear that unless it's completely inclusive, unless we move away from corporate ownership of food production, much more towards decentralization, find a way to ensure that farmers, food workers, consumers for that matter, has an approach to food production and consumption that is equitable and social just overall. And often there seems to be a crunch between the consolidation perspective and the decentralization perspective. And that is one of the issues we're going to be addressing today, and hopefully come up with some good ways of deepening and strengthening the collaboration between two sides that often is perceived, and with underlining perceived, as being in opposition. So who do we have speaking today? Well, I'm very happy and proud to have two esteemed speakers going to be addressing the hot topic issue today. The first to speak will be Astrid, Milena, Bernal, Rubio, who is from the Global Forest Coalition, so one of our partners. She's coordinating Unstoppable Livestock campaign. Astrid has a very esteemed background and is an expert on working in the intersectionality of food systems, human rights, and working with indigenous peoples and rural communities as well, particularly in Colombia. So she has a great tradition and experience and expertise in addressing these issues and building bridges with those who are on the front line of food production. Our other speaker today is Richa Thapliyal. I'm sorry for not pronouncing that potentially correctly. She's the Vice President of Production, Research and Operations at Rebellyous Foods. So Richa is very passionate about plant-based meat and making it affordable to all. So very much focused on the operationalization, the manufacturing, and of course the amplification of the alternative meat issue, and also how you get it to market quicker. So we're going to be hearing from each person first. So they're going to have around 6 to 8 minutes of time in which they talk to their specific point on food sovereignty and on alternative protein, after which we will be getting into kind of a moderated conversation. And the conversation will be focused on essentially imagine replicating the two of them sitting together in front of a campfire or at a bus stop or somewhere, and having a little bit of time together and actually having an honest conversation about, well, I don't agree with you, but tell me a bit more about X, Y, and Z, and so forth. Of course, it's difficult in a forum like this, but we're hoping to kind of replicate an honest and open and respectful conversation to that end. And then after that, we will be getting into answering questions that you, as the spectators, will be raising to the tube. So with that, I think we're ready to move on to the first talk of today, and it will be Richa who will be speaking first. And Richa, I do apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, and do correct me as a first point of order when you take the floor, so we all get it right. So without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Lasse. And you know, you are pretty close. I would say thank you for pronouncing my name 99% correctly. And that's really good. Thank you. I will start with sharing my screen. Here, myself. I am. Okay, I'm going to try this instead. My apologies. There.
No worries. The screen is visible to us, nice and clear. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Lasse, and viewers at home. I am very excited and privileged for this opportunity. But before I start, I would like to share a short story with all of you. It is a beautiful, sunny Monday morning, and I'm driving down the highway, and I'm really excited about the rest of my day. I'm going to work, and I love my job. As always, there are hundreds of vehicles on the road, but one catches my eye. I notice a semi-truck pulling forward on my left-hand side, and I feel like somebody's looking at me. So I turned over my shoulder to the left, and I notice a pig. As the truck drives by, I am eye to eye with this pig, whose eyes are filled with sadness, hopelessness, and desperation. The saddest part is probably that the pig was hoping somebody would save her. The truck continued its journey to the slaughterhouse. That pig and tens of thousands of animals like her are slaughtered for food every year across the globe, every day across the globe as part of our food system. Now, there are many issues with our food system. We can talk about land justice, climate justice, human rights, animal rights. And a lot of these issues are time sensitive. They come with a level of urgency because they can be associated directly with our ability to survive as a species. Today, I will argue that alternative proteins provide a feasible solution to tackle some of the biggest problems we're facing today, and also collaborate and complement other movements in the system that will allow us to change the food system for the better holistically. So why alternative proteins? Benefit to humans, environments, and animals. It is a feasible option, and it does complement other movements. We can work together. Talking about the benefits for the planet, it is probably, what I'm going to share is probably not going to be a surprise to anybody in this room. But if we move towards alternative proteins, we can reduce human-induced greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. Land use, we can reduce 76% of our food land use while moving towards alternative proteins. And that is equal to US, China, EU, and Australia combined. That is over 3.1 billion hectares of land that will be freed up so we can utilize it for other purposes. It is a very resource intensive industry. And if we are able to move towards alternative proteins, we can free up a lot of our resources. Talking about benefits to human health. There are many benefits that we can talk about, but I'm going to focus specifically on one, and that is pandemics. According to United Nations, 4 out of the 7 likely causes for the next pandemic are related to animal agriculture. 4 out of 7, that is 57%. And we all know what COVID-19 did to the world. 97 million people were thrown into abject poverty due to COVID in 2020. Millions of people lost their lives. If we can prevent the next pandemic and do nothing else, that would still be a win for the humanity. Benefits to the animals. The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And they sure can. 70 billion animals are killed for food every year. That is almost 10 times our human population at this point of time. If we move towards alternative proteins, we literally will save billions of lives every year. Now, I'm talking about this great solution that will help us with climate change, human health, animal health. How is this feasible? What is the theory of change? Here's what I'm proposing. We work with price and taste parity. We work with the existing system and improve it from within. And then we participate with government and policy work. Let's talk about price and taste parity. Just Egg reached price parity with premium chicken eggs just 10 days ago. And for those of you who may not be aware, Just Egg is an alternative egg producer. That is huge for the industry. Rebellyous Foods, where I work, we launched our first proof of concept to reach price parity with chicken earlier this year. And we are intending to launch that in production in summer of next year. So from where I'm looking at it, it is well within reach. If we can produce meats which taste just as good, cost just as much, if not lesser, we will be able to remove all the negative impacts that animal protein has on the environment, but the consumers will not have to sacrifice anything at all. And that would make the change easier. Using the existing system. Global meat production is expected to be at 831 billion pounds in 2030. That is a lot of meat, and this is not even accounting for the fish and sea animals that we kill for food. And I'm really not sure how we will meet this demand or any other protein demand at this scale without having a scalable system. And our existing system, as inefficient as it is able to meet a large portion of this demand. And I'll give you an example of Rebellyous Foods as to what we are doing. We're working with the National School Lunch Program, and we have partnered with 70 school districts which serve 950,000 students across the country. Imagine the scale of difference we can make if we're able to feed plant-based chicken nuggets to 950,000 students. And we are only partnering with 70 school districts right now. There are over 12,000 school districts. So there is so much room for us to make a difference on such a large scale, utilizing the existing food system. Talking about government and policy. About $540 billion are given in agricultural subsidies across the world. And this number is expected to go up to $1.8 trillion by 2030. According to United Nations, 90% of those are harmful causes. If we can divert some of this money towards alternative proteins, that would be a game changer for us. Complements other systems. How does alternative protein complement other systems? Well, it is less resource intensive inherently. Just by the nature of how we are producing plant-based proteins and alternative proteins, it will use less land, less water, it'll have lesser impact on the environment, so that we will have land to talk about. We will have the bandwidth to talk about regenerative farming, agroecology, and social and labor justice movements. Improve labor conditions. Even if we don't change anything in the food system and we replace animal meat with alternative proteins, the working conditions of the workers in those factories is going to inherently improve. Factory farm workers are 1.6 times as likely to get injured at work compared to other industries. That is a big number. That's almost double. And I'll give you an example of how complementary systems can work together. And that our example is Plantega. Plantega is one of our customers. They buy a product from us. And what they do is they're currently only working in New York, where they partner with local bodegas and local stores across New York and provide plant-based meat solutions in their delis. across New York. And we know that New York has many, many areas that have food access issues. So this is a very good example of how plant-based protein movement or alternative proteins can be combined with other movements towards the benefit for all. To summarize, alternative proteins are not the only solution. The food system is complex. It is not a linear problem. There are many, many factors we need to consider. But we are in a state of climate emergency, and this is a documented fact. And in order for us to have a food system to save, to fix, and to revamp, we need to act now, and we don't have much time left. What alternative proteins do is they provide us a viable solution that benefits all of us and buys us time to work towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richa, for that great presentation and those great words. I apologize, we cannot do innovation. It's always strange to deliver your final point. I don't get that you'll get in real life, but we really appreciate your great input and your great thoughts here. So I would like to come over now to Milena for her to give her presentation, after which we will get into a moderated conversation between the two of you. So over to you, Milena.
Thank you, Lasse, and nice to hear about Richa and the great efforts that also the new options of food are trying to do for our people and our planet. So I will present also a short perspective about how the food, forest, and rights are crucial, are important to reach this systems transformation that we already were discussing during these minutes and also during these last years. So my name is Milena Bernal. As already Lasse introduced me, I'm working with the Global Forest Coalition. The Global Forest Coalition is an organization, an international organization of 123 NGOs, women groups, and indigenous peoples organizations from more than 70 countries, working together to defend the rights of peoples and advocates for policies that address the causes of forest and biodiversity loss. So we aim to promote the food sovereignty by advocating support for agroecological practices, mainly women's rights, and sustainable small farmers and small scale production as a way to stop the unsustainable livestock farming that is harming our nature and our planet. So let's next, please, next slide. So here are some facts that I would like to highlight. I want to start just with key facts about what is beyond the industry, beyond the industrial livestock production. So beyond that industry, what the World Bank has already identified is that more than more than the FAO found that more than 350 million indigenous peoples depends, many of them who depends on forests and lands, basically work and live there, are experts in conservation of endangered and native crops and livestock breeds. Many of them are also people who are living in poor or difficult conditions. This is also something that the World Bank have identified, that almost 70% of the world's rural population is poor. Many of them are small-scale agricultural farmers, and have as primary source the income that they receive from the small production systems. Oxfam also have identified another data that remind us that only 50% of all agricultural land is owned directly and formally by women. So what this leaves us is that any impact of local and regional and other kind of impacts in their food systems may disproportionately impact people and ecosystems. And last, something that I want to also highlight today is that the small scale local and diverse food systems have also proven to be vital for reducing hunger and food insecurity, something that we already faced during the pandemic, especially, and a number and a data that is increasing each day. Next slide, please. So why we need to consider this data? Basically because modifying food consumption maybe is a possible solution, but maybe it's not the solution that will work with everyone. We need to start considering that a vast number of the vegetables, fruits, and food that are part of our daily routines exist today, thanks to the indigenous peoples, thanks to the small farmers, these people who practice small farming, and is the people who are still being extremely impacted for so many different ways of introduction of new technologies and a new kind of food, including these new trends to eat different kind of products such as meat or processed food. Basically, I want to highlight this with this picture that was taken in the Amazon River, that where there are no roads, there are new ways that are being constructed to reach those places that are not made or were not initially made from the indigenous people's perspective to produce any specific kind of food such as livestock, such as meat production or livestock production. So this picture just highlight how the new markets are moving. You already know that livestock, and as Richa said, livestock expansion is what impacts thousands of people and hundreds of millions of hectares of land. So this is to remember that maybe the best way to promote a change is not introducing new cultures and new structures of nutrition in different groups. Next slide, please. So this is something also important according to the to the World Bank. There are around of 2.2 billion people worldwide who relied on forest, but also this doesn't consider the amount of people who are living near or adjacent to the forest, that are also around of 350 million people who depends for their subsistence on forest and the livelihoods they already promote in these ecosystems. And additionally, the International Fund for Agricultural Development and the United Nations Environmental Program also highlight that the number of people who are practicing smallholder agriculture could be as high as 2.5 billion worldwide. Of course, there are even more people, and one of the pathways that the FAO found, and one of the pathways that the FAO recommends to address the drivers behind food insecurity is basically empower these smallholders, especially women, because nowadays, as you know, women used to be the responsible for the food production, in small crops within small scale farming systems. And in this sense, any impacts for the local production will or may disproportionately impact women and women around the world, especially these marginalized minorities such as indigenous peoples and also Afro-descendant communities in countries such as Latin America, the Caribbean, and of course Africa. Next slide, please. So what is happening today? Well, basically that sadly women and smallholders are not considering properly within the policies, within the solutions. We basically are not taking action, and we don't consider them as real change makers. On a recent research made by Global Forest Coalition, we highlight how in regions such as Latin America and the Caribbean, women own just 18% of agricultural lands and receive 10% of the credit and 5% of technical assistance granted to the industrial or to the livestock sector, not industrialized sector, but the livestock sector. So women have less access to financial services due to mobility issues, traditional norms, and of course the lack of access to land. So only 15% of all agricultural lands is owned directly and formally by women around the world. This means that they have fewer possibilities to invest in their lands for a small production, what is also impacting directly their means of life, the food they are producing, the food sovereignty of the people, and of course, this is making more difficult to them to access to markets, especially because if we consider that the export-oriented policies to supply high demand of cereals, plants, meat, and other materials basically are excluding these people from the policy. So, and in regions such as Latin America, in Africa, the agricultural production, the policies, the markets are based on a large scale monocultures and are based on large landed estates and kind of traditional land use model that is designed to comply with requirements of a high demanded supply chain. So in response to these inequities, indigenous peoples, small farmers, and of course women are organizing. They are organizing to produce food using agroecological methods that are of course more socially, economically, and environmentally just, but also they are trying to reconnect with their land, their knowledge, their seeds, and the history through the political act of working the land and produce system and produce food in a more sustainable system. Next slide, please. So what we need to keep in mind, first, that there are more than 500 million people and small farmers who depends on small production, and they are not thinking on a market-oriented solution for the hunger crisis. What is needed now is first to make more visible the invisible work of those people who are behind of the traditional system and the sustainable food production. We need to keep in mind that promoting gender just and equitable livelihood alternatives for those smallholders who are already producing food is crucial. We cannot keep in excluding them and excluding their traditional knowledge and the historical recognition of their role from policies. We also need to recognize, as Richa said, that this is a complex problem, and probably we won't have a unique and an easy solution. We need to start approaching this dichotomy that was created between the modern, the quick, the easy, and the complexity of solutions from each reality, from each reality of the people and the communities in general. And finally, we need to keep in mind that all what we are doing is complementary, but we need to emphasize that our efforts should be focused on a non-market oriented solution, promoting more other alternatives, such as promoting the local markets. This will help more the people are to keep more sustainable systems, respect and recognize different means of lives and culture. That is crucial nowadays. And last, of course, based on the realities of our food, we need to recognize also that not everything that is vegetarian is good just because it's vegetarian, because this is something that we need to also keep in mind, that there are many products and basically supplements that are not really well for our health. And yeah, and to close, I just want to highlight this sentence from one member of Asprosec, that is a community and organizational roots or a more local organization in Colombia. And they also highlight and always say that there are no imposed solutions, but solutions should be always agreed. So we need to start thinking on how we will agree in how we will approach this problem. And yeah, so that's everything that I want to share today. Just invite to continue talking in a and a more let's say solutions, or at least thinking solutions that where we can keep everyone together.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Milena. Lots of food for thought there, and thanks for sharing those quite staggering numbers with us as well in terms of the amount of farmers, smallholder farmers. So now we have time for a little bit of a discussion, mainly between the two of you, but also I'm going to provide a few cues and some thoughts on where to start. And then we will get into the questions that are being posted in Slido. And just for the spectators, do keep either adding questions to Slido, or even better, finding some questions that are already there that you like and just like them. Those who get the most likes will be asked first. So over to you, Milena and Richa, and I just wanted to draw a few parallels here. It seems that there is this continued conundrum we are facing, that on one hand we have urgency, on the other hand we have inclusivity. That the urgency, the climate emergency particularly, dictates that we need to move quickly, come up with quick solutions. On the other hand, if we do not include everybody, including the smallholder farmers and the producers, it's not going to be ethical, it's not going to be strategic as well. So when it comes down to is on the one hand, the commodification, the other hand, food sovereignty or consolidation and decentralization. It seems to me that both of you agree that in any case, we should be moving towards a food system that is focused on regenerative agriculture, agroecology, and a system that works with nature as opposed to against nature. Where I think there might be some issues is around the ownership of that. So the question I wanted to kind of pose to both of you to get the conversation started is on one hand, do you see there is a way of promoting or leveraging alternative protein that is much more suited to helping smallholder farmers as well, if they want to transition? Secondly, is there a way to ensure that if the main focus is on industrialized livestock, the big production systems, how can they be addressed and advised to transition without it affecting smallholder farmers? And within that, also maybe some thoughts on, particularly from you, Milena, do you see a role for alternative protein, and how, from your perspective of representing smallholder farmers, how do you see that coming about? And how do you see the biggest problems coming out of alternative protein that Richa mentioned? So I'll give the floor first to Richa for you to come in.
Thank you, Lasse. I definitely see how, I mean, I don't have a perfect answer to this, but I see no reason why we cannot integrate the smaller farmers, the smaller landholders into producing ingredients that would go into alternative proteins. I mean, 30% of the world's food is produced by landhold, small farmers, which are, I think, the land of 2 hectares or lesser than that. So I think we just need to work towards, as businesses and as organizations, when we are defining our strategy as to how we are going to source our ingredients, we can have those guidelines in place where we look for local, where we look for sustainable. And I'll give you an example of Lush Cosmetics. It's not food system, but I used to work for Lush Cosmetics, and we had a very strong mandate of sustainable farming and working locally. And Lush is a huge company, millions of dollars. And if we can take that focus into the food industry as well, where we are working towards alternative proteins and increasing the market demand while supporting the local businesses or the smaller farmers, there is no, I don't see a reason why we could not do that. And within that, I would say that there is consolidation of power and monopsony within the system, where there are few large vendors that are dominating the market when it comes to ingredient supplies for alternative protein industry, for example. We probably need to be working with government regulations and policies to be able to support the smaller farmers as well, because we do need to tackle it from multiple different angles. It can't be just businesses trying to support smaller farmers. We need to bring in the government and policy work. And I'll give the example of Netherlands, where Netherlands has, I believe, invested around 60 million euros into alternative proteins, but then they have also invested 25 billion euros into farmer transformation, as they can expect that as alternative protein grows, the livestock farmers will lose livelihood. So they're investing already money, many times more money into that, so that they're able to support the farmers as well. So I think it needs to be a multifaceted approach where the businesses consider it, as well as government and policy work supports it as well.
Thanks a lot, Richa. Milena, any thoughts on that? And maybe also some thoughts on Richa's theory of change, and if you think there is a space for alternative protein during the transition.
Well, thank you, Lasse and Richa. I think there are some questions also that came from that question, and it's first is how we want to include the farmers or the small farmers. Do we also keep that idea that farmers will continue being the producers for a high and large demand of food in other places? I mean, if we go with the farmers and we ask to them what they want to eat, how they want to produce, this is something that we need to first keep in mind, that basically, and if we ask to people in movements like in La Villa Campesina, for example, basically they just want to be excluded from this large scale and large based models of food production. In the case that we are considering small farmers as part of a system where the supply chain wants to include them or consider their rights within this production system that we already have, we need to also consider that they are facing historically exclusion. So basically, starting from the policies, and I agree in this with Richa when she said that, yeah, we need something urgent to promote first the recognition of these small farmers, of these people in the production system. We need more policies oriented to take urgent action and to include them more. But what I don't agree at all is that we need to continue promoting actually with them and with other people this kind of consumption of alternative proteins, since basically what we can also start promote with people is to consume and to improve the consumption of food, where we are buying this food. Are we promoting local markets? Are we promoting people? Are we promoting actions to go to the supermarket and continue buying these products that basically are not guaranteeing that all farmers are being included in the production? How we are ensuring that the people, or at least the child, and these interesting initiatives are really thinking into improve the life and the health of people. I mean, and this is a question that I also want to propose here, and it's, what if we can offer to a child, instead of let's say plant-based hamburger, what if we can supply to them or offer to them fruits, vegetables, or at least other kind of ingredients that are more natural and inclusive in general terms. So I think it's more like we need to start thinking on how we will include the people who are historically being excluded from the policies. And this is kind of what I think could be part of the solution. Basically, and mainly what we have listened from many of them is that, okay, if we are considering a more sustainable system, we need to also take into account that include better policies in terms of better access to credit, ensure access to land, to ensure that the supply chain respects from the first step women's and labor rights. Maybe this will change a bit the practice of food production, but I don't think it will be the solution would be to promote alternative plant-based systems to everyone, because maybe not everyone wants to start eating this kind of food, especially in countries or in regions where the traditional food production is more related to the small farming production.
Thanks a lot, Milena. Very important points there. And maybe coming back to you, Richa, hearing what Milena is saying, do you think there is a space to ensure that the production and the R&D of alternative protein moves away from what it is to some extent now, predominantly global north, very much associated with venture capitalism? How, if at all possible, how could that move into becoming much more in line with smallholder producers and actually offer a role and start a decentralization, not just of food production, but also of the R&D and particularly the ownership of alternative protein?
Thank you, Lasse and Milena. All very good points. And I've been struggling with this, Lasse, as I've been researching on this topic. I have found that the research and development is so heavy in developed countries, like the global north, as we call it, because there is money that is available. So it's, there's money in research, but in areas where there isn't as much money available for research, it's just harder for people to actually work on those issues. So I would say that is a bottleneck in terms of spreading the research and development and making it more democratic across the world, just because of how money distribution is currently in the global system. So that would be the bottleneck in my mind. But if I was to think of a solution as to how we could integrate the smallholding farmers and that in the terms of how Milena was talking about it, I I'm not sure if large scale is the solution to that. I think I do agree with Milena that there are certain cultures and food systems that are primarily focused on smaller scale food production, and that is, fruits, vegetables, your grain, and you eat it. That's what you do. Where my bigger conversation and challenge is in terms of all of this conversation is that, yes, there are many people like that, but there are many, many millions of others also who have no way to sustain themselves or get enough nutrition without actually, leaning on imports or exports or some version of that, because their infrastructure, the country's infrastructure and economy does not support production locally. And that is a problem.
So maybe just a quick question to follow up on that, Richa, before I come back to you, Milena. So one of the panelists we had yesterday said that, to what you just said, that the R&D has to follow the finances and the markets for that. And because we talked about when would we be able to see in every village like a small tank that can produce either plant-based meat or cell-based meat, and it will be affordable, the IP will be set free and so forth. Is that 2, 5, or 8 years away? And he was saying it's maybe 20 years away because we have to go through the long R&D production commercialization period before it can be trickling down to that. But if we do that, if we wait that long, it's going to be, clashing continuously with what Milena is saying. So how do we move the R&D and the ownership away from where it is now and actually become inclusive from the onset, and at least liaise with or consult the farmers that will be impacted on the ground?
I would say I'll go back I'll answer this question in two parts. Let's say first is I would go back to government support and funding, because it is IP protected right now because it's venture capitalist money. If government funds this research in public universities, there is going to be more access to this data where anybody can pick it up and do useful work with it. But right now it's protected and in certain hands. So that would be the first part. And second is, I do think that as a movement, alternative proteins do need to have that lens of how do we consider other systems as we are making progress towards alternative proteins. So we can keep those things in mind. So when we are thinking of solutions as a business, as a research facility, what can we do at our level to impact change towards the point that Milena just made? So I think that change of perspective is, or change, I'm sure there are some people thinking of it that way, but I think the global, overall, it's not an umbrella, belief that we all should look at it. That's not the case. That is why we're having this conversation. But I do think there is need for us to incorporate some of the vision into how alt protein is being developed.
Thanks, Richa. And then maybe over to you, Milena. Do you then think, based on what Richa is saying and how the discussion is unfolding, that there might be a role for R&D that is publicly funded, so we bypass the IP problem, and which would include smallholder farmers, including livestock farmers, with a view to the transitioning food system? Do you think there's a space for that if done in a way that is based on equity and inclusion, and also focus on the true not the true cost of food, but the true value of food?
Yeah, well, I think there are some aspects that we need to consider first. And talking about this, urgency of transition of this amount of people who are consuming a lot of meat and who really needs to change their, or at least we hope they change their meat consumption patterns. I think first we need to start thinking on small farmers, and also using these market strategies that already exist. That, for example, many farmers already are suffering also from climate change. Small farmers who can be included in this supply chains in some way. They are also facing another risk. For example, there are many solutions that as big companies are using, small farmers can also start using those, as for example, the insurance companies could start developing new measures to include these small farmers in the food production when they are impacted by climate change struggles. But also there is the need to start thinking basically who are the owners of the benefits. So as much as the supply chain increase, or as biggest is, the role of these small farmers starts being smaller. So even if we try to include them in these big supply chains, we need to start thinking on how we will ensure that they are really being, or they are really receiving a benefit from it. So to cut the dependence or the number of intermediaries that are always present in this kind of food production systems is also important. So how we will reduce this kind of intermediation of a lot of small companies who wants to just produce or just want to take the grains and create another kind of supply, or at least another kind of product to then sell to another. At least there is a big chain where the people who are receiving the less benefits used to be the small farmers. So I think there are ways. It's more like how we can use these market-oriented solutions, or how we are use also these tools that the market offers to include people who are basically producing the food. Like these local markets are, as someone from the La Via Campesina also mentioned, these local markets used to be neglected, and basically all of our food is always present there in these local markets. Just there is a way that we also need to start advocating from our activities as NGOs, as companies, that these people can receive at least be more directed and included in the production of alternative foods, for example.
Thanks a lot, Milena. It seems to me that there is a ground for collaboration there, and I guess from this conversation and previous analysis that one of the ways to move forward is to acknowledge what you both said. There needs to be much more inclusivity and much more decentralization when it comes to ultra-protein, but also recognition that smallholder farmers, including smallholder livestock farmers, they will have to continue, and that is not what the key problem is here. It's the big industrialized livestock production. It's the CAFOs, which are threatening health, climate, as well as the smallholder livestock farmers. So kind of breaking the current narrative around that if you're against meat, you're against all meat, it probably is something that would have to be discussed here as well at some point. So we have around 10 minutes left now. I want to make sure we get to the questions from the audience as well. And do keep in mind, at the end, you will have around 1 minute each just for some closing remarks before we move into wrapping up. So let's start with the one that is on top, which is the one that got the most likes. And I think both of you probably could provide some interesting perspectives on that. So the question is, are there opportunities for indigenous peoples to engage in the alt protein supply chain? Maybe Richa, you first.
Sure. I'd say that would go back to something we just discussed, which was that depending on what kind of work the indigenous people are actually working on, right? I can't say, yes, indigenous people can be a part of the alt protein supply chain. Well, what is that specific community doing? Are they farming? Are they processing? Are they looking to work in the industry? So there are multitudes of ways you could be involved in the alt protein supply chain that will go from raising crops to selling them to moving the product, moving the ingredients into a manufacturing unit, producing, and then moving the latter half of the product into the, towards the market and to the customers. So I'd say there's multitudes of opportunities across, depending on wherever people want to participate.
Thanks a lot, Richa. And over to you, Milena. These indigenous peoples are stakeholders you are engaging with on a daily basis through your work. Do you think they see a role for themselves in the alternative protein space? And if not, what would it take for them to see this as an opportunity for them in their livelihoods?
Yeah, thank you, Lasse. So based on the work that we are doing at Global Forest Coalition, I think there are actually a lot of interest from many smallholders, and I cannot say that all indigenous peoples communities and all indigenous peoples want to be involved in this kind of production or alternative supply chain. But what I want to say is that first, they are really conscious about the impact that meat consumption can have in the system. They are the more aware people about what are the impacts in the planet and in the ecosystem in general. So there are examples also of people in Africa, for example, who are trying to produce tofu from a really using really traditional techniques as a way to reduce their milk consumption. This is a case that we already, there are also cases that we already document in some of the reports that Global Forest Coalition developed, and it's also the interest of women to participate in these markets where the supply of vegetables, fruits can be more included. So of course it starts with a lot of policy and political support, but also it requires a lot of engagement and commitment from the companies who wants to produce these alternative meals. And I think this is also kind of what the people where we work always mention, and they always said it depends a lot of the history of the population. It depends a lot of the history of the community. Many indigenous peoples, and their tradition is not consume meat, but when if they are doing it, they trying to do it in a sustainable way. But when they are aware that in some way the production is impacting the nature, is impacting the ecosystem, they are trying also to promote alternative solutions, as that one that I was mentioned before. They are also trying to promote, and basically it's kind of lack of technical support and lack of financial support for them to help these initiatives that they are trying to promote. But basically it's not like we cannot say to them stop eating meat from one day to another, because this is part also of what is part of first the history that also include initial different diet, but it's also part of what we consider as a transition. They also need support in terms of transition from the meat consumption, even when it's locally or small farming producing, to absolutely plant-based consumption. But of course, it will depend on what they consider each organization. If each community is different, and we need to start by guaranteeing what we already ask, and to consult them, to ask them what they really want.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Milena, for those questions, and very relevant. I think we have time for one more question before we move into closing remarks. And actually, I would take a question that is not on the screen here, but it's like further down the list of the Slido, because some of the other questions I think are quite equal to the one we already covered now. So the question I want to raise is the following: how far away are we from price parity for alternative protein in the global majority? Or is that question irrelevant, and should we only be talking about alternative protein in the global north? Over to you first, Richa.
Thank you, Lasse. I would say, in terms of, and I can speak for, plant-based chicken because that's what I'm personally working on right now, is we're expecting to launch the proof of concept summer of next year. And the intention is to actually lease out the technology. We are open to partnerships where other people can use the technology that we have to produce plant-based meats in a cheaper manner, in a more efficient manner, and also in a way where it is better for the people who are actually making alternative proteins. So I would say, at least for chicken, if our technology is implemented and works as intended, we should be able to reach price parity for chicken, for certain chicken products by end of next year. And the second half of this question about, should we be only talking about all protein in global north? I don't think so. I think my opinion is that, yes, we can change things in the global north, but most of the world is not global north. And we need to be thinking about food systems there as well. And hence the value of open source technology, or being able to partner with other companies across the world so as to give them the technology so they can actually utilize the benefits of something that has been created in one part of the world. So I would say, my thought is that we need to be working on the issue throughout the world and move the research from where it is right now and spread it out as much as we can. And one very good example of this actually is Infinite Foods, which is working right now on providing alternative proteins to Africa in particular. That's their target market. So currently they're only moving products from Europe and America into Africa, but eventually their goal is to start production within Africa, within the continent, so that they can support the local economies there. Yeah, so I think.
Thank you so much,
yeah.
Thank you so much, Richa. And Milena, just like a very quick reply to this question as well.
Yeah, I just consider, this is a global problem and should be addressed from all parts, global and north and global south, but in different ways. We need to recognize that also the high demand of proteins came from the small global north, and this is having a high impact in the global south. So the OECD already recognized, they also recognize that there is a highly global competitive, that maybe we need to focus, yes, on how we can change the pattern consumption in the global north, but we need to recognize that in the global north there are also a lot of small farmers who are requiring more support, but also we need to recognize that in the commodity production there are huge problems and issues related to land concentration and deforestation. So this is part of the problems that we need to address as a world globally. And of course, I think in terms of prices, for example, if you go to a global south country, it could be more difficult to find more alternative production products or different products that you can choose, or you have less opportunity to choose, at least, because of course the market is oriented to provide food where there is a lot of demand of meat consumption, of meat, and it's in the global north in general. But we cannot deny that also the global south is offering a highly and increased demand of meat. So we need to also address that.
Great, thanks, Milena. I understand the polluter pays principle. plays a role here as well. Richa, I see your hand, but I would ask you to maybe include your comment in your closing remark because we are running out of time. So for both of you, just 1 minute of key takeaways from the conversation today. So Richa, you first.
Thank you, Lasse. I agree with Milena on a lot of points. I think we do need to consider smaller farmers, indigenous people, and the local communities. But I do think there is a definite way where we can include alternative proteins with a certain aspect to a certain degree. Let me just rephrase myself. To a certain degree, I think it's very possible for us to incorporate some of the aspects that Milena mentioned about food sovereignty and working with local farmers, local farms towards the alternative protein production. But I also will reiterate that alternative protein is not the only solution. So we do need to continue working together. Having said that, what I do want to address is that Global North was where the high meat consumption may have started. But right now, for example, meat consumption in Africa is expected to increase by 30% in the next few decades. China is the largest producer of meat in the world with 70 billion pounds. So the movement has migrated. As the developing countries are growing, the GDP is increasing, there's more affordability. People are consuming more and more meat throughout the world. So other than the aspect of just being equitable, I think there's also a very heavy need to intervene in those markets so that we can hopefully leapfrog and not end up in the same situation as US in. So if they are in the early stages of starting to eat more and more meat, if we can intervene now and help them leapfrog towards alternative proteins, that'll save all of us so much pain. Thank you.
So prevention is better than curing.
Yes.
I get that. Great. And final word over to you, Milena.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I also want to highlight that there are many topics that I found in common with Richa. I think we need to promote an urgent solution to the increasing meat consumption. This is urgent and is necessary, and all solutions are always welcome. I just want to highlight that we need to start considering the people who have been always excluded, at the people who from so many years ago has always provided a solution. The people who start planting vegetables, fruits, they were the people who gave us the seeds. So we need to start including them again in all the policies. And of course, what I also think is that we need to also start thinking in food as our nutritious supplement, not as a commercial product. So if we can also start changing how we also daily consume, what are we consuming, how we are choosing our food is also important. It's part of the consumption and citizens' responsibility. And last, I just want to always remark that we need to start considering people, basically consulting people, what they really want and how they want to be included. Do not impose any solution, as I mentioned in the slides. We cannot impose solutions. The solutions will bring from the people naturally, and we can work always together if we can agree on that.
Thank you. Then that will be the final words in this hot topic conversation today. Richa and Milena, it's been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed your insights, your guidance, and I consider this the beginning of a much longer conversation that we rather sooner than later will find some better points of collaboration on, so we can work on what we all want to change the food system to a much better food system.